Hey guys, it's Steve here. Today I'm in front of my garage to show you my latest Raspberry Pi project. This one actually involves my iPhone and the garage door. Hey Siri, what's the status of the garage door?
Garage door is closed.
That's right, I have my iPhone talking to a Raspberry Pi that's monitoring my garage door. I can also say, hey Siri, open the garage door.
Garage door opening.
So now the garage door is opening and Siri's controlling it. Let's go in the garage and I'll show you how I set this up, and we'll walk through the entire instructions on how to do this project. So here we can see my garage door opener, and right above it I have a Raspberry Pi 0W and a 4-channel relay switch. The relay switch is what actually controls the garage door opener, making it open and close. We're able to connect this 4-channel relay switch to the GPIO pins that are on a Raspberry Pi. So this Raspberry Pi 0W has header pins on it, but if you do not have one that has header pins on it, we can stick wires in the little holes here that can connect up to the relay switch. Now I have a wiring diagram on my GitHub page, so you can review that to see how all of this is connected up. Now to talk more about the relay switch, let's go over to the garage door opener button and I'll show you how we can hook up this relay switch. So I'm standing next to the service door entering my garage, and I find here the button that is used to open and control the garage door opener. On here there is only 2 wires that connect to this button, and these wires go back to the garage door opener and tell it when to open and close. Well, if we were to pull out these 2 wires, we would see that if we touch them together for a second, it would trigger the garage door to open and close. So we're able to use the relay switch that's connected to the Raspberry Pi to mimic this button. That way when we trigger the relay switch, it'll take these 2 wires, touch them together for 1 second, which will then trigger our garage door opener. To find out if this project is compatible with your garage door opener, we're going to be using a paperclip and doing the paperclip test. So what we need to do for this is we need to follow these wires that come to this button and follow them back to our garage door opener. So if I follow the wire that comes from the garage door opener button, I find out that they end up in this control center panel. In here there are 3 terminals. 2 of those terminals are the ones that are connected to the wires that go to the garage door button. Well, if I was to take our paperclip and make it into a U here, I can then touch these 2 terminals together with the paperclip and it'll open up the garage door. So let's test that. Triggers the garage door, stops the garage door, closes the garage door. If your garage door is capable of doing this with a paperclip, we can set up our Raspberry Pi to control this garage door opener. So using the wiring diagram that I have posted on my GitHub page, it'll show you how to wire this up to the Raspberry Pi to the GPIO pins that are on it. On that relay switch, there's 3 terminals. There's a common terminal, a normally open terminal, and a normally closed terminal. Using the wiring diagram, we're only going to be using 2 of those ports. You're going to run a wire from that relay switch and connect it to these 2 terminals. 1 wire to the common, 1 to the normally open. The gauge of wire that you use for this doesn't need to be very thick. Just compare it to the wire that is connected to the garage door opener button to begin with. Let's go ahead and we'll move over to the magnetic reed switches I have hooked up to the garage door that'll actually tell if the garage door is open or closed. To tell if our garage door is open or closed, we're going to be using some magnetic reed switches that are also connected up to the Raspberry Pi. So I actually have 2 of these magnetic reed switches. I have one right here when the garage door is closed, and I have a second one up top when the garage door is open. Now in this project, you can either use 1 magnetic reed switch or you can use 2. I prefer you to use 2, but 1 can get you by as well. Now the way these work is that next to the switch there is a magnet. This magnet travels along with the garage door. So when the garage door is closed, the magnet comes down and it then triggers this magnetic reed switch, tells it to close. Now when the garage door opens up, this reed switch will follow along with the garage and then will make contact with our second magnetic reed switch. When the magnet gets up there, it'll then trigger a signal telling the Raspberry Pi that the garage is open. These once again have 3 terminals. There's a common terminal, a normally closed, and a normally open terminal. We're going to be connecting up the common terminal and the normally open terminal. Once again, there is a wiring diagram on my GitHub page, so check that out. The common terminal that is on both of these magnetic reed switches both get hooked up to a ground pin on the GPIO pins. Now you can hook them up to the exact same ground pin, or you can hook them up to different ground pins on the Raspberry Pi. It is easier just to use 1 ground pin. Now this project will allow for up to 3 garage doors to be controlled by the Raspberry Pi and that relay switch. Now if you have multiple garage doors besides just one, you will need multiple magnetic reed switches. You'll need at least one for every single garage door. If you have 3 garage doors, I prefer you to have 6 total relay switches, 2 for every single door. Now when I set this up, I did not actually drill into the garage door. To hook this magnet up, all I did was I removed one of the screws that holds on this hinge and stuck a piece of metal behind it and tightened it down. So this is an old license plate that's actually has the magnet on here. Now the wire that I used on these magnetic reed switches is just internet cable, Cat5. Now I have 2 wires going to this button. I have 2 wires that go to this second relay switch, and all 4 of those wires head up to the Raspberry Pi. Now once again, use the wiring diagram and it'll show you how to hook all of this up. So the only things that are powered up on this project are the garage door itself and the Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi will give power to the relay switch to trigger that. Now these 2 reed switches that are connected to the garage door, those do not receive any power at all. Now at the end of this project, I will also show you how to set up Siri on this project so you can use your iPhone or even your Apple Watch. Now let's go ahead and we'll go back inside and we'll start setting up all the software for this project. I made it really easy to use so you can just follow along, and everything is set up through a web browser once you have the Raspberry Pi set up itself. Now that we looked at the hardware, let's go ahead and we'll set up the software on the Raspberry Pi. Now I've already gone ahead and I've installed the headless version of the Raspberry OS onto the Raspberry Pi, and I set up my Wi-Fi and my SSH. Now if you do not know how to set these up on a Raspberry Pi, I do have a separate video that will show you how to do it. But let's just assume that you already have this set up and ready to go. Now as I continue, I do not have any extra magnetic reed switches in my house. The only ones I have are out in the garage right now being used. So I'm just using 3 pieces of wire hooked up to the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. Doing this, I will be able to test if the garage door is open and closed based on the software. And you can do this as well just to test everything before you start buying all the hardware. So let's go ahead and we'll SSH into our Raspberry Pi. And if we look at our GitHub, I have all the instructions written down on what to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to update the apt-get app. So we're going to go sudo apt-get update. Now since that's done, we need to install the software that will allow us to access the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. So once again, we'll type that sudo apt-get install rpi.gpio. Once again, this will take a minute to install. Now with that installed, we need to set up our Flask web server. Now Flask is a lightweight web server that will allow us to run Python code within it, which will then allow us to access the GPIO pins and report back. So first thing we need to do is we need to install the Python 3 pip package. So let me clear this out. We're going to type sudo apt-get install python 3-pip, pip. Once again, this will take a minute to install. Now with pip installed, we're going to use pip3 to install Flask. So we're going to go sudo pip3 install Flask. Once again, let this install. With Flask installed, the last thing we need to do is install Git. This will allow us to download my code off the GitHub. So we'll type sudo apt-get install git. And the final thing that we need to do is download my code off the GitHub. So we'll just use the last command, sudo git clone, and then this long address. And with that command, it's going to download all of my code off the GitHub onto the Raspberry Pi so we can use it. Now with that done, we can go ahead and we can type an ls command. And we see that we now have a new folder called Siri Garage, capital S, capital G. So let's go into that one. And let's clear this out and we'll do an ls command. And we do have a few files now located in here. The one that's called siriweb.py, that is the main program that we're going to use to run on the Raspberry Pi. Now there's one file I forgot to upload that will be here by the time you guys see this video, is a relay test. Now the 4-channel relay switch that I have in the garage that actually triggers the garage door, I have a piece of software that will test to make sure that is connected up to the Raspberry Pi correctly. Now if you run python 3 space relaytest.py, it'll then trigger every single one of those relays in a series, just to make sure that is connected properly. So we're going to move past that for right now. If we go ahead and we type sudo python3, one word, space Siri web.py and hit enter, this will then launch our program. Give this a minute to load, and on the screen it'll then show you the correct address to log into on any web browser or on your phone to connect into the Raspberry Pi. So if we go ahead and we copy this address, which is the IP address of the Raspberry Pi :5001. That is what I have set up here. So if you go ahead and you copy that, and we're going to open up a web browser. You can do it on your computer or on a phone, doesn't matter. So I'm going to paste this in here. Now when we first log into our website, we can see that we have 3 question marks on a red background. Question mark means that the Raspberry Pi doesn't know the current status of the garage door. That means the door would be in between one of those 2 sensors that we have hooked up. So I've hooked up some jumper wires. I have one to ground, one to pin 16, and one to pin 18. If we hook our ground to our pin 16, which means the garage door is closed, and we go ahead and we click any of these question marks, which will then refresh the page, we can now see that we have a green house showing that the garage is closed, which is good. If we disconnect these and we hook our ground to pin 18, which means that the garage is open, and we go ahead and click one of the question marks, which will then refresh and show that we have a red house showing that the garage is open. Just by doing that, we can see that this website is currently working, being able to tell the status based on the GPIO pins. Now we can personalize this if you do not have 3 garage doors. If you only have 1 garage door, I have a settings page that is all set up on the Raspberry Pi. So at the current address of the Raspberry Pi :5001, we're going to go /settings with a capital S. Right away, it's going to ask us to log in, and the default username and password is admin. Now, once you have this project completely set up, it will be recommended that you change the username and password to something else so someone else cannot log into this and be able to control your garage door. From there, now we can go ahead and we can personalize our website. Let's say my house, I only have 1 garage door, so at the very top, I'm going to select 1 garage door. I can rename this garage door whatever I want. If you have 3 garage doors, you might have husband, wife, kids. I'm just going to name mine Steve. Next, it's going to ask us the number of sensors we have on the door. Now, like I said, I would prefer you to have 2 sensors on your garage door, one when the garage is closed and one when the garage is open. So I have 2 sensors, so I'm going to leave that still. Next, it's going to have enable password control. On our website that I just showed that had the 3 question marks, at the very top, we can click a little button, enter in a password, and then select which garage door we want to open. Now, if you plan on only using Siri for this project, I recommend that you disable this. That way no one can try hacking in to your garage door. The password that is going to be on that website is going to be only numerical. So when you're on your phone, it'll only show you a number pad instead of the full QWERTY keyboard to enter in a password. Right below that, we're going to be able to enable Siri control. Now, if you want to be able to control your phone using Siri, I have a separate password set up for that, and that password can be any alphanumeric or special character password. So I'm going to enable both of those, and right now the current passwords for both of those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for both of them. Next, we have our default web page port. Like I said, I'm using port 5001. You can change that if you wish, but let's just leave it for right now. And then it has our username and password for the admin page. Let's go ahead and we'll leave that for right now. At the very bottom, we're going to leave this for a little bit later. This is code that we can then enter in. So every time the Raspberry Pi reboots, it'll boot up our software to begin with. But since we're just testing it out right now, let's leave that blank. So back up to the top, let's go ahead and we will save our settings. But if you get an error on the screen saying you did not have permission to access a certain file, it's probably because you did not start our program using sudo. So you want to type sudo python3 siriweb.py. If you do that, you'll have the permissions to write to the file and you won't get an error on your screen. Now if we go ahead and we click our garage door status page, you can see that I now only have one garage door that's named Steve. The very top of this page has a button that says click here to operate garage door. If you click there, it'll then give you a box to enter in the password, which is 1 through 8, and then you can select which door you want to operate. For me, I just have Steve labeled right here. So if I was to do that and I click the picture below of the house, it'll then open up the garage door. Now that we saved our settings and we see that we now only have one garage door that's named Steve, let's go ahead and test to see what happens when the garage door is closed. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to reset these pins here. Now when I click the picture in the center of the screen here, the page will refresh. And now that we can see that the background changed to green and we now have a green house showing that the garage is closed. Now that we see that our program is working, you can go ahead and you can try this on a phone as well to see how it looks. Now we're going to set up the Raspberry Pi to auto start our program every time the Raspberry Pi reboots. Right now, if we were to kill our SSH connection, our program will now die and you won't be able to access this web page anymore. So let's make it so every time the Pi reboots, our program will auto start. So let's go back into the settings page on the Raspberry Pi. Once again, log in with our username and password. Now, once again, at the very bottom of the screen here, there are two windows. The big box is actually an auto start program that is already pre-built into the Raspberry Pi. I've just auto-populated it right here on the screen. And right above there is another text field that has 2 lines of code in it, which are the code that is used to start up our program. So if we go ahead and we click into that smaller box, it'll highlight it for us. We're going to go ahead and we're going to copy that, and then we're going to go into the big text field. And right before the last line that says exit 0, we are going to paste that line there. The last thing we need to do is we need to hit save boot file, and that will actually save it to the Raspberry Pi. Once that is done, you can then go ahead and you can actually reboot the Raspberry Pi and our program will be running in the background. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, JLC PCB. If you're into DIY and prototyping your own electronics, JLC can help take your bird's nest of a project and turn it into a beautiful printed circuit board. This is just a Raspberry Pi. Using a free web-based design program that can be found through their website, you can design and lay out your project to be turned into a printed circuit board, with printed circuit boards starting at $2 for 5 PCBs. Not only do they offer multiple layer printed circuit boards, they also offer full component assembly as well as solder stencils to help you with self-assembly. If you ever thought about making your own PCBs, you can't go wrong at this price. Once again, thanks to JLC PCB for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the video description below. We're going to go ahead and we're going to set up Siri on our iPhone to be able to control the garage door and check the status of the garage door. I have instructions on the Raspberry Pi with pictures to show you how to do it and walk you through it. Now you can find the address to the Siri instructions by either looking at the terminal window, and it will show an address to connect to. Otherwise, you can log into the settings page on the Raspberry Pi and there is a Siri setup instruction link. On here, there's 2 different sections. There's one to check the status of the garage door, and there's a second set of instructions on how to actually open the garage door. And besides opening the garage door, those settings will also show you how to close the garage door. Now we have 2 different instructions because I make it a little bit more difficult to actually open and close the garage door than check the status. Obviously, you do not want someone hacking in and trying to open and close your garage door without your permission, but who really cares knowing the status of the garage door? Now we're going to log into our iPhone and we're going to look for the Shortcuts app. This should already be on your iPhone as it is an Apple app. So if you don't know how to find this on your phone, go ahead and you just take your finger and you pull down on the screen and it will give you a search bar that you can search for shortcuts. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up the Shortcuts app. And at the very top there is a plus sign that we're going to go ahead and click. After that, we're going to hit the button that says Add Action. And right there at the very top there is going to be a search window that we can search for Get Contents Of. From there, you can see that in the actions will show up a green square with an arrow pointing down that says Get Contents of URL. Select that option. In the next field, it's going to ask us for a URL. In that field, we're going to add the IP address of the Raspberry Pi :5000 /Siri /garage door status. Next, we're going to hit the plus sign right below that, and we're going to add a new action, and we're going to search for the action Speak. We're going to find a red square that says Speech Text, and right away it'll say Speak Contents of URL. That'll be the default. That's all we need. Next, we can go ahead and we can rename this. Now, we can rename this to whatever we want. So you'll be saying, hey Siri, blah, 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 blah. So I just have it, hey Siri, what's the status of the garage door? If you click the little icon that is right next to the name, you can change the image that'll show up in the Shortcuts app if you wish. So you can have a different image and a different color for each one. Once that's all said and done, you can click the Done button. And then when our new shortcut shows up, when you click the image, it's going to ask you permission to actually access the internet. This is just a safety feature that's built into the iPhone. So it's going to say, what is the status of the garage door would like to access the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. Go ahead and hit OK. If you do not hit OK, it will not actually go out and talk to the Raspberry Pi. To set up opening and closing of the garage door, it's going to be mostly the exact same steps with a few more added steps that are added for security reasons. So once ahead, we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up the Shortcuts app. We're going to hit the plus sign up in the upper corner, and we're going to add an action. In the search field, search for Get Contents Of, and select the option that says Get Contents of URL. And there we're going to type the URL of the Raspberry Pi :5000/Siri/garage. In that same field, there's going to be another little option that says Show More with a little chevron next to it. So go ahead and click that. And then it'll give you an option to choose a method. Right away, it's going to say Get. So we want to click on the Get, and we want to go ahead and change that to Post. We're going to be posting information to the Raspberry Pi. Right below that is going to say Request Body, and we want to select the option that says Form. Right below that is going to say Add New Field. Click that, and we're going to choose Text. And then we're going to name that text field PS. This is going to be our password, so PS. And in the next field, enter the password to open up Siri. So the default is 1234567 Next, we're going to add a new field. This new field is once again going to be a text field, and we are going to name this text field Door. And in the next field, we're going to call this Door 1. So with a capital D, Door 1, all one word. So we have 3 garage doors. These are going to be Door 1, Door 2, Door 3. It will not be the name that we had changed it to. So like in my example, I changed mine to Steve. I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to use Door 1, one word. We are then going to add a third text field, and we're going to call this Do What. And that's going to be all one word. In that field, we're either going to choose Open or Close, capital O, capital C. So whatever one that we're going to set up first, choose that option. So I'm going to use the word Open. Next, we're going to go add a new action using the blue plus sign. And we are once again going to search for Speak. We're going to choose the option that says Speech Text. That will have a red square next to it. And by default, it'll say Speak Contents of URL. That's exactly what we want. From there, we can go ahead and hit the 3 dots, and we can rename this to whatever we want. So we can call it Open the Garage Door. That way, when we say, Hey Siri, open the garage door, that'll trigger this function. Next to that, we can then go ahead and change a different icon if we want and a different background. And then once again, we're going to hit the Done button. If we click that field, a window will pop up saying, Open the garage door, would like to access that IP address. Go ahead and hit OK. If you do not hit OK, this shortcut will not be able to talk to the Raspberry Pi. Now to do closing the garage door, we're going to do the exact same steps as in Open the garage door, except for we'll change the one field that says Do What, we'll change that to Close. So the best way to set all this up is to follow the directions that are right on the Raspberry Pi. Everything is numbered and kind of tells you which to click, and it'll just make it really easy to set this up. Now the setup that I showed you in this video will only work while you're on your home Wi-Fi, but it is possible to be able to access the Raspberry Pi while out in the real world. Now in order to do this, you need to set up port forwarding on your home router. Now your router acts as a firewall to prevent internet traffic from coming in and talking to all your computers and stuff. But we can set up port forwarding to allow one port to be able to talk to the Raspberry Pi. Now I'm not going to get into it in this video just because there's so many different routers out there that there's many different ways to set this up. I do have a video showing you one example of how I was able to set this up on my home router. The way that it works is your home actually has an external IP address that is different from everyone else's in the world. Now you can find out your external IP address just by going to Google and searching, what is my IP address? Or if you are on my GitHub page, I do have a link on there that will then show your external IP address. Once you have port forwarding set up, you can follow the exact same Siri setup instructions that I showed in this video, but you'd be replacing the Raspberry Pi's IP address with the external IP address of your home router. If everything's set up correctly, you can turn off Wi-Fi on your phone and go ahead and try to access that external IP address with the port number you set up on your home router to see if you can control your Raspberry Pi. If it's set up correctly, you can open up a web browser, go to that address and port number, and you should be able to see the web page on your phone. Now, if you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up so I know I did a good job, and be sure to check out the video description for any information I leave down there. I will leave links to my GitHub page that will have all the instructions on how to download all this software so you can copy and paste. And once again, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, JLC PCB. Be sure to check out their link in the video description down below as well. If you guys have any questions or comments about this video, be sure to ask those down below and I will try to answer them for you. Once again, I hope you guys like this video. Be sure to hit that thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will have more Raspberry Pi videos coming out in the future here. So thanks for watching, guys. Have a good night.